When I spoke with you before, you told me that the first thing I should understand to try to begin to understand the basis of Sakharov and his morality is the Moscow intelligentsia.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Can you help me with
This
that?
is his origin is very essential for understanding his character, his feeling of responsibility for the country, for people of the country, for future. It's one thing. Then high level of morality of these people, of this intelligentsia. And you know from the Russian literature that the idea of devotion to people is very essential for the Russian culture of 19th, 20th century. And for Sakharov, it was natural. Very modest in his private, personal interests and his private life, very kind in his relation to people, softness, and at the same time, hard principles. Hard principle, basic principle, shouldn't be obeyed to circumstances of life. Is this right?
Yeah, well,
Yes, you agree? No. And Russian intelligentsia.
You know, Russian, not only Moscow.
Not
as
Moscow,
you said,
yes.
it's Russian in general. It concerns people in Georgia, in Georgia, and in Armenia. If they are educated, and that's and Russian language and Russian literature, they're the same kind. Ukraine.
And at the same time, the maybe largest part of Russian intelligentsia was also expecting revolution, waiting for it, yes, looking forward to it. And of course, there were people of different political parties with different political ideals, but in general, expectation of better life, better system of society was imperative also.
It was absolute belief that it would be better later.
Yes.
It was an absolute belief that Russia will bring great advancement in culture and life in general.
And even after revolution, the 20s were the years of great hopes, because there was, you know, so-called NEP, new economic politics, not economic politics, and even the people of the age of some 20, 1930, say, they were convinced that they believe that the first Petiliyetka, first 5-year plans will be fulfilled and everything will be better. And not only better, everything after maybe in near future, the life will be good and there will be no divorces in families and everything will be
No,
good.
I might add, if you allow me, that I consider it a miracle, the way Stalin and his company managed to keep people from knowing what was really happening. It was the years of collectivization. Millions died, millions were exiled, and yet most of the people didn't know anything about it. It's wonder, it's a miracle. I think all the time how they managed to reach such a result. Probably fear. People are frightened to death. If someone was arrested in your family, you kept it a secret. You were made to keep it a secret.
But
There was an Italian writer, Machiavelli. In his book, Il Principe, I suppose, about the prince, the ruler, he says that the ruler, it is possible for the ruler, to the ruler, to inspire fear in such a manner that if not conquer the love of people, that at any rate to escape hateness. And Stalin succeeded in it. He was a good pupil.
student of. I don't understand that. We talked about this before. I mean, did you know, for example, did your families know people who were disappearing?
My father was arrested and died, and probably killed, probably assassinated.
1940.
My own father. But yet, other people became afraid of me when that happened. Most of the people, not all, naturally. There were some people who, on the other, who really behaved in quite a different way. But in general, people avoided me. They crossed the street not to have to either to say hello to me or to be afraid if they did say hello to me. It was kept secret. When anyone was invited to GPU, he was warned that he mustn't say a word, you see. It was a system
Yes, but
of secrecy.
the
It doesn't
terror,
explain everything. It doesn't explain everything. I still think it's a mystery how he managed to keep most of the people unaware of what was happening.
Unaware of the scale,
Of the
maybe.
scale, of the scale.
and this explains why Sakharov, even when he went to school in the last years of school, in the last years he went.
His parents didn't send him early.
Yes, but he was brought up in family mostly. And in the university, when the war began, he was loyal.
He also believed it. That
Also, although his uncle, I suppose, his uncle was arrested. It is amazing, but it is explained not only by conscientious, by conscious ideology, but by the bringing up from the kindergarten, from school. People were surrounded by press and by radio, which inspired the same ideas, and it was a system of оглупления,
stupefying people.
stupefying. And liberation from it was not easy, even for the death, after the Stalin's death, after the misfortune, as people used to say.
Most of the people thought it was a great tragedy for Russia when Stalin died.
Yes.
Including Sakharov. He wrote
I
that.
don't know about Sakharov.
I don't know, I don't remember about Sakharov, but I myself, I thought that those who will come after him will be worse, would be worse, and not so to say, great as he. He was a great scale, and the others near to him seemed to be smaller, not sufficiently politically meaningful.
I must say that I was of a different opinion, but that was
Yes.
probably because of my American background.
Yes,
Because I had no
undoubtedly,
illusions, undoubtedly. Because I had no illusions by then.
So you knew by then.
I knew by
Yes,
then.
yes. I knew also, but not to such an extent. I see.
How important is it, do you think, that Sakharov was kept out of Soviet schools for so much of his education and was educated at home. How important is
Yes,
that
it
in
was.
understanding?
It was of great importance indeed. I agree. I agree. The mild atmosphere of his home and honesty. Already in school, boys were becoming used to lie. And I think the atmosphere of mutual trust and of honesty, his family had maybe the same meaning as for you, the American background, the American youth.
Was he also shielded, though, from the larger life of the country at that time?
No,
Shielded
you
longer?
can. Nobody can understand outside Russia how it was possible. Well, I told you something. How it was possible to see and not to understand,
And yet
and
not to
yet
see.
not to see. To be convinced that, as they used to say those days, лес рубит, щепки летят. How to translate it? When people cut trees in the forest, then some ships are flying.
inevitable. Chips are inevitable.
Stupefied, of course. Not all, of course, but those who were not stupefied, They were
would
silent.
earlier or sooner or later would land in camps. in
no,
labor
they
camps.
are simply they should be silent.
Kept quiet.
Kept
quiet.
quiet, yes. And any man, any individual is so constructed that he's inclined to convince himself so as to adapt to the circumstances in society, stupefying oneself, not only by government, but by oneself.
Participating in it.
Yes,
In one way or another. Well, there were pretty much участие, but there were different grades of participation.
Different grades of participation in what?
Во всем этом процессе, in all this process. Some people were so...
I don't understand what you mean.
Что в этом принимали участие
В
все.
чем в этом?
Ну вот в этой иллюзии, в этой жизни.
иллюзия.
Но в разной степени, in different degrees.
Yes,
Yes,
there are,
there were
of
some people
course.
who were so hypocritical, they thought it was right to think one way and speak another. Some people suffered because everything got mixed up. What they saw and what they thought somehow didn't come together, and they were terribly upset by it. And some people did as little as possible. You attended those political clubs where they taught you the history of the party, but you didn't have to say anything if you didn't want to. I never did, by the way. But of course, I say it again, it's not to my credit. I credit it to my American background. I just wouldn't say a word that I didn't believe.
But above all was terror and fear.
Yes, they were all terrified.
People were
Terrified.
terrified. People use now the wrong word repression. Repression is a punishment for something done. It may be not just, but at any rate, it is persecution for something, and terror has its aim to terrify people, to inspire
innocent
total
people.
fear.
The most loyal, the most
And
innocent
it
people.
takes from the society absolutely I forgot the word, совершенно случайно, так сказать. Выхватывать людей.
At random.
Takes the
They arrested people.
arrested quite at random.
I know when they arrested.
Of course.
In this context, do you understand young Sakharov's decision to go to work on the bomb for
Yes.
Stalin?
Yes, it is quite understandable because it's very quite easy to understand because it was just after the wartime, and in wartime, however strange it can look, it may look, there was a real patriotism. Maybe this was because Hitler, in distinction to Stalin, proclaimed his aims openly, conquering other countries, transferring slavery for Slavs, annihilation of Jews. All was open. At the same time, Stalin covered all by words about democracy. The constitution adopted in 1937 was one of the best in the world. But only it wasn't fulfilled. But all was covered by noble words. And therefore, thus, in the wartime, the people was patriotic. And the people saved the country. And after the patriotic feelings were so great that after that, when the Cold War time established, after the Churchill-Fulton speech, it looked also like new threat to the country. And it was natural to defend the country. So people, scientists, quite consciously went to have a bomb and later to have the equilibrium of bomb armament. And I must say I was at first very much surprised when for the first time foreign scientists came en masse, so to say, many of them, to the conference in 1956, I suppose, 1956. They were doing bomb in America. And our physicists, Sakharov, no, they didn't meet Sakharov, but Tom and other people did bomb, made bomb for Stalin here. And I was surprised how friendly they met. Quite friendly, but I understood later that they considered that they were doing the common work. They had the common cause to have the equilibrium, not monopoly on nuclear armament. And such attitudes were quite common. So the transformation of Sakharov began only when he saw that the rulers, having already prepared bomb, do not want to take into consideration any arguments from scientists who did it. And when he saw that the tests of the bomb were merciless, terrible, and he was frightened. He saw the real situation, and then he started to think it over, and it was very very hard period in
Very
his life.
difficult process.
Okay, do we need to change? We need to change cassettes?
You speak Russian?
I study Russian. I've been studying Russian. So I understand a little, and I mean, I understand much more than I speak. I'm still too embarrassed to try to speak, except when I drink vodka, and then I speak. Yeah.
just studied it in America.
Yes, no, in America.
They teach you there.
You began to speak about this, extraordinary transformation of Sakharov, this extraordinary journey. Why do you think it happened? What did it have to do with his knowledge of the authorities or his acquaintance with?
First, it was controversy with authorities, direct controversy. Controversy about tests, atom bomb tests. And later, he saw the cynicism of rulers, open cynicism, and that he couldn't help thinking about, say, peasants in terrible state. In those times, peasants even didn't have passports, you know, and couldn't leave kolkhoz. They were like slaves, like serfs in old Russia. And putting two and two together, he saw the terrible picture on being thinking absolutely free about this, everything. He formulated his first paper, I call it for myself, first manifesto in 1968. It was like burst of ideological bomb, I would say. It was remarkable. It was remarkable.
And why? Why did it have such an impact?
He told things which other people, majority of other people, great majority, of course there were free thinkers, there was exceptions, we know their names, they were clever, and they were shrewd and noble people, but in general, people didn't dare to believe what they felt, to say to themselves what Sakharov said. And it was taken at once by many and many as an obvious truth, which only should be told openly. So it had a great impression.
It loosened the tongues of very many people, very many plain people. I remember taxi drivers who talked about Sakharov.
Yes.
And there's I remember a taxi driver who said, you know, there are such horrible things in our park, and yet I don't dare to speak about it. I'm afraid. But now there is an example of Sakharov. He's not afraid. I will take up the matter too. I'll risk them and take up the matter too. And just one case, and it was very typical, very typical.
Oh, like in Anderson's tale about naked king, the child who said openly.
That he is naked.
Mm-hmm.
But of course it was more the great idea of convergence of two systems, which doesn't belong to him because in the West it was proclaimed already, but he told about it here openly, and it was a great idea. And then nobody could imagine that it is possible. And this is happening now.
To pronounce the truth, to say the truth, it was out of question. Something was wrong with our minds and our souls. No, I know what was wrong. That terrible fear that crept into us. But we didn't dare to say what we thought and what we knew. We spoke in whispers in our own bedroom, you see, at night. at home only then.
Would you like me to say about this graphological analysis? No?
In a minute, I would.
Ah,
Okay,
yes, yeah,
okay. What one of the things I'd like for you to tell me when before 1968,
Yes.
when he began to come
Yes.
to Moscow more and more,
Yes.
you told me one time when he came in with a manuscript to you that
Oh yes, with one book, no, a typed book, book
right.
by Medvedev.
Will you tell me
Yes,
about that?
Yes, yes, it was. I don't remember exactly. It was in 1966, I suppose. He came to me, and we lived in different place. He came to me with bright eyes, burning eyes. You see, this is a book which tells about how Stalin came to power, what happened, and so on. And there was, he knew he knew then less than I knew. Because this book, to the great part, was a collection of scattered facts published already by Khrushchev himself in his report to the Congress and in other papers and so on. But collected together, it produced a very great impression. And oh yeah, yes, it was. I know when it was. It was in 1966. I know why. I suppose because after some conversation, I tried to tell him about my work on physics, which I liked. And he didn't want to listen, and I was offended. But he started again to discuss this political book and this situation.
Such impression that he couldn't talk of anything
But
else.
as a genius, he passed this way of his education very quickly.
And at that time, were you free to have such a political discussion in the department?
In my room.
Ah.
In my room. In my apartment. Of course, there was some danger. There were. It was overheard. But it was not very probable in my apartment, and we could speak. And it was already after the 20th Party Congress, so it was possible. It was possible.
So other people at that
I
time.
asked him in one of these years between it was after 68, I suppose, when he was already prohibited to come back to this object. I asked him when he came to me, what do you think? How do you think? Do you have tail behind you? Are you tailed? Are you tailed? He said, of course, I'm sure. I didn't notice, but I'm sure I have tail. I should have tail, because they should know that I didn't go to the American embassy. I suppose he had tail. Yeah, I agreed with him, yes, because we were rather good, high attitude about professionalism of KGB.
And do you think when he wrote the 1968 essay that he considered the possible consequences?
Which consequence? For him personally,
Yes.
first, he was to some extent still defended by his position, by his merits, so to say. But for the ideology of other people, of course, he knew the consequence. By the way, then, very soon, they met with Solzhenitsyn. And their first meeting was in our apartment. They arranged. Yes, and Solzhenitsyn expressed his wish to meet Sakharov and proposed some place. But Sakharov proposed our apartment, and they were in our apartment. They did at once. It was obvious that Solzhenitsyn wanted to speak only with Sakharov alone, and we left them in the room. And
That was their first meeting.
Sakharov and Solzhenitsyn repeatedly were criticizing Sakharov and so on. And after Solzhenitsyn said that he was покорен, he was покорен. He was conquered by Sakharov's how his personality, how he quietly listened to his rather rough criticism.
So that was
What
so
he was,
characteristic
that
of Sakharov.
characteristic.
He was like that, always smiling.
He couldn't
always
be
quiet.
offended by his criticism.
He was above
no.
all that. He was
It
above
is traditional for scientists.
all.
At least in our scientific society, in our institute, it was quite natural, the criticism in scientific questions, and people couldn't be offended.
No, but he was, that was a trait of his personality. He was always calm and smiling, never excited.
Yes.
It was such a, without knowing what Sakharov really represented, it was a pleasure to be in his company. Something.
Yes.
And why? Well, we always felt in the first place that he was above other people. Some people said he kept aloof. I don't think he consciously kept aloof. No. It's simply that you felt that he was above you, somewhere way above you. We always used to say, Eugene and I used to say that he is the kind of a person that was made of material like,
Yes.
Like Jesus Christ, like Schweitzer. Some outstanding moral personality with great high principles.
At the same time,
very
simplicity.
kind and simple.
Very simplicity. We may take his reminiscences. Recently I read one piece when he considers the reasons for physicists here and in the United States, the physicists who took part in bomb affair. He discusses very shrewdly various motives, their positions, psychological, moral, and so on. And quite immediately he writes, for summer we hired a room in the village for my wife with little child. They were living there. And in the other room was
The other was rented.
not rented. It was occupied by the hostess, Uncle Fenya. Uncle Fenya, it's a very simple name. It's quite clear that it's very plain. A very nice woman. So you see.
I'd like pardon me. I didn't. Yeah. I said I want to tell an episode that might be of interest to you, that might characterize Sakharov. It's the way he told me and the way he reacted to his receiving the Nobel Prize. I was at a tailor establishment with my daughter, waiting in line to have our measures taken. And there I saw Andrei Dmitrievich Sakharov sitting, the last one on the line, and he greeted us very joyfully. We sat down next to him. He started to ask us some things about our life, and then he said, "You know, I just learned that I've been given Nobel Prize," just like that. And he kept on sitting in the line until his turn came.
Did you talk to him in the late 60s, early 70s about his growing political involvement?
We have many conversations, but it was so evident, so natural that there was no necessity to stress it.
But there was that autograph of his, joyfully, hopefully, with great joy. Don't you remember? It was much later. You see, I've known him so long, and he always took me for granted as Eugene's wife. He knew nothing about my own biography. Nothing. And well, my biography is criminal from the point of view of a communist. And then I told him how I came here to build socialism and how I became disappointed and I dropped out of this whole movement. And he was so glad. His whole face was lighted up. And he gave us then
It was
some,
exactly after receiving the
Nobel
Nobel
Prize.
Prize.
And
He
he
and
gave us-
Helena Georgian visited us, and us from we
and
were
he gave,
sitting.
and he gave us a
the-
manuscript of his, and he wrote.
Of the Nobel Prize
He did that.
lecture.
Yes, and he wrote, what was it, joyfully,
With
hopefully,
joyfully, with joy, with proud,
the pride.
with pride, with hope, and with mutual understanding. But there was no necessity to stress it. After 1973, people escaped his company. And
Yes, of course.
in the assembly of academy, by and by, he was sitting alone around him. And I saw it often, and it was very painful to see him like that. Of course, I used to come to him. But it was so simple, everything. He accepted it as natural.
And what kinds of pressures how are we on tape, Brett?
Okay, 2 minutes.
Why don't we change real fast? Was here in January. Yes, yes. Well, let me back up a little bit because you're now in 1973.
Yes.
After he came back to the department full time,
Yes, at 1969.
after he was banned from the work at the Object,
Yes.
was the department threatened by
Yes.
because of his presence?
The department was proud.
No, it was threatened.
I was threatened. Yes. It was threatened by various measures. There was such an episode after his interview in 1973, when the, how you called hunting now, hunting,
Which one?
traveler,
Which hunting? Which?
traveler.
What, yeah,
Not the hunting. There is a
which
word.
hunting?
On the hunting, when the dogs are led to follow the beast of the fox and so on. There was such an atmosphere that everybody tried to knock him in any way, to bite him. There was a company of signing letters publicly, and the same thing was in our institute. There was prepared a blaming letter against him, and scientists ought to subscribe it. Many and many knew, some of scientists signed it voluntarily, quite voluntarily, quite readily, but many of them didn't want to do it and tried to escape. And now I know some cases of other laboratories when people did escape. In one laboratory, I know the head of the laboratory, the party organizer, and the trade union organizer, this called triangle, you know. The triangle decided, okay, let us have this, put the shame on ourselves, let us sign, but let nobody else to be involved. That was such a, but in any way, it was signed by some 200 people, I suppose, but not a single man in theory department. There was some 60 people, few postgraduates, some 10 are postgraduates, not a single. Of course, it has no special consequence for many. For me, for instance, I don't know.
Well, it had
Maybe,
some,
I didn't say, huh?
No, you didn't say. She had no consequences.
I don't know.
No,
But
What were the consequences?
some party members of our department, there were, they passed through a very bad period when they were forced to write, to sign, and they refused. And it was chantage. All the time after that, there was a real, you know, the chantage. All right. For instance, when people were going to, were invited to some conference abroad, in those times, until recently, it was necessary to have a recommendation from party organization. And when very essential, world-known scientists from our department were invited, it was simply told to them, sign and you will have the recommendation. They didn't want. There was one case, and a very talented young man submitted and defended brilliantly a dissertation, the thesis. But this, the result of the voting should be sent to higher commission, special commission, for approval. And it should be accompanied with, again, with a recommendation from party organization. And he was told, sign, and you sign, I will give recommendation. If not, you will not receive it. I know that he wouldn't be approved in his new scientific degree. And he was very much at a loss. And they asked me, and I told me there is no, I understand it's a very disgraceful, disgraceful chantage, I don't know how to say.
Ja nie znam drugi szczęście, nie mogę wspomnieć.
But there was simple bargaining about that. This is graceful, but if you shall sign, nobody will reproach you. And he signed, and we saw that this was, you know the word, tell this word, what it means. When was suppose kidnapping, when the people are doing paying.
Ransom.
No, ransom.
Ransom? Mickey, are you listening?
Is Mickey probably no.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Okay. But it was a single case. All others preferred not to
Blackmail.
go.
Blackmail.
Blackmail. Exactly, blackmail. And all others preferred not to go to the conferences. I don't know. To me, it was some special relation. I was older than others, and I was let to go abroad. Oh yes, in 1977, 1975 I was ill. 1976 I was permitted to, without this blackmailing. I'm not a party member. Maybe that's the reason. But such was the situation, and some small,
Pickles, needle pickles.
little pigs all the time. But for some members of the apartment, it was difficult.
Well, you probably didn't get your order on your 75th birthday. That was expected because of him.
It was
you
not
know?
in 75.
When
It was in 82 when
when
I
you
was
were
70.
When you were 70, you were.
And in 75 I got the order when all the academy was.
No, that was for your jubilee.
No,
For
no,
your
no.
jubilee.
For Jubilee in 1982. I
Well,
did it.
perhaps
Yeah,
1982.
92.
You didn't get it. You didn't get it.
Nobody counts that.
And
92,
then
when
what
he
was-
was in Gorky, and we were,
That was the only
connected
way
with
they
him.
could let you know that.
yes.
That they know of your activities, of your attitude.
No, the whole department was such a situation.
Under suspicion.
Yes, always under suspicion, but no expelling from the work. Nothing essential. At Stalin's time, it would be that different.
And when members of the academy before exile would not sit with him,
Yes.
can you explain that?
Better not to see.
Better not to explain.
I understand. They're frightened. They're frightened.
Cowardly behavior. It's cowardly behavior. There's nothing of
I
principle
wouldn't say that
there.
everybody would behave like that.
Most
But
of it.
most.
Most of it.
It was very очень страшно, very.
Different, terrible time.
Terrible.
You would never know what you would get for it. You see, you lived under the threat of being punished and not knowing what punishment would be.
Maybe it will be not so terrible. The punishment would be not so terrible. But you know, in chess, who plays chess knows the rule that the threat is stronger than fulfillment. To keep under threat is better than fulfill.
You see, there was always fear for the family, for the children. Even if you yourself were ready to take on some sort of punishment, it would concern your family in general. It demanded very great sacrifice and very high spirit to do it.
Of course, the natural question which can be heard from every man brought up in a democratic country, is how could people do science which needs free thinking, and at the same time the other half of their mind, of their feelings, was twisted. To some extent it was possible. Turned out possible. It turned out that good physicists was brought up. They are now invited to United States in a great number. It is very strange, huh?
People in Russia, people are used to lying. They're not truthful as a rule, unless they have personal relations with someone. But in general, they're prepared to say lies. That's the safest way to live, maybe the only safe way. By the way, Sakharov writes in his book that that I discovered that an American mind cannot accept lying. They can't lie, they're honest. Well, here's the other way around, you see. Russia's history has taught Russian people not to be truthful and not to be open, and it's much safer either to say the lie or to go around it, the truth somewhere. That's straightforward.
During this time when scientists were being pressured, succumbing to the pressures to some degree or another, it keeps occurring to me how much of the power of the state was directed against Sakharov, against this one man.
Oh, yes.
Why? What were they so afraid of?
He became a symbol.
Symbol.
He became an example that it is possible not to subdue. I remember one episode in 1973, exactly, I suppose September. Yes, in September. You know, the episode when terrorists visited him. And he refused to sign their proclamation. Also, they threatened to him and to Elena Georgievna by arms and said that it will be worse for your grandchild, and so on. And the next day, I was sitting in the institute, and either I phoned him or he phoned. I learned about that. I suppose I phoned, or maybe he phoned because the next day should be the regular seminar, Tuesday, and he always asked what will be. He always visited. And nevertheless, I spoke to him, and I was in horror. And he told me how it was, but by and by, I don't know how, the conversation slipped into science, because I just returned from France, from the conference, and brought some news. And I suppose it was because I was explaining what will be after, tomorrow on the seminar. And I started to explain to him, and at one moment I said, "My goodness, what about are we talking when such horror things are happening?" And he answered me quietly, "Oh,